If you listened to last Friday night's show, episode 577, you heard Chris Tucker come on and talk about the several experiences that she's had with dogmen and something else. Well, I didn't have enough time to ask her questions about her experiences, so I invited her to come back. Luckily, she agreed, so here we are. Chris, thanks so much for coming back.
Thank you so much for having me back as well.
Oh, you're welcome. It's great having you here. Chris, for any of the listeners who missed last Friday night's show, please tell them about yourself.
I am a 36 female. I live in Abilene, Texas, and I have 4 kids that my occupation is, keeping them alive and not at each other's throat. And I'm an amateur artist, so that's what I do to keep myself sane, and that was it.
You told us about your 4 children that you devote a lot of time to keeping alive. Are they all 4 boys or a mix of boys and girls?
I have 3 older boys and 1 girl. She's the youngest.
Wow, if you have 3 sons, and yeah, that is a full-time job. Knowing how boys are, yeah, we're a lot of work.
Oh, yeah. You guys are.
Yeah, we definitely are. No, I was. Now that you've done that, please give those listeners a brief summary of these encounters that you've had.
Okay. My first encounter was when I was 6 years old, and I was living in my hometown of Fort Stockton, which is West Texas, very much the desert compared to Abilene, Texas, where I live. And there was an old shack. I looked up because I was feeling watched, and I saw 2 glowing blue balls that then, as a child, I thought was more of a paranormal incident. And now, with what I know now, it was eye shine. And the second one was I was a 16-year-old, and this is when I moved to Abilene, Texas with my dad and stepmother, and I was taking out the trash at night, and I observed a man with a large dog walking down the street away from us. And when I looked back up after dumping all the trash in the dumpster, it was 2 people walking instead. And then I had a very odd dream with a werewolf in it that night. I saw a very large canine-looking footprint outside of my window in the dirt the next day, and had ruled out that it wasn't our 2 small dogs because they're small, and we live in the city limits, so there's no larger predator that could have produced that, and even there were no bigger dogs that I knew of that our neighbors had that could have produced that. I forgot to add that to last week's show, so that was odd. And then my final encounter that I know of was at Lake Abilene. It's a couple of miles out of town next to the state park. And while I was searching for a more off the beaten path trail that my friend and I were used to hiking, I ended up feeling watched and heard a very odd noise and just started to feel like I was being hunted. And I went ahead and turned back around to make it towards the car, and I'm pretty sure it mind spoke in my head and said, "Leave, get out." And once I had reached a clearing that I called the meadow to grab my my messenger bag, I had turned around to look at this large oak tree, and I saw a clawed hand holding on to it, but that was all I saw. And then it let go of it gently and backed off, and then I ran to my car.
Your other encounters were definitely frightening, but the fact that when you had that encounter at Lake Abilene, you only saw the Dogman's hand, I think that right there is what makes that one, in my opinion, the most frightening. What do you think?
Definitely, because I was alone and out in the woods, and by then I had turned 17, as it was mid-March, before stuff starts blooming. And, I didn't have like a pocket knife, as if that could do me any justice, but, just giving a sense of I had no weapon. And, from feeling hunted by that pack of coyotes when I was with my brothers, that weird guttural, I even called it primitive instinct to lay low, those are the only two times that I have felt that. And then seeing that arm, which was pretty high off the ground too, yeah.
Sometimes it's worse when you can't see all that much. It's easy to think that the more you see, that's going to be more frightening, but yeah, that's not always the case. And speaking of frightening, one of the creepiest things that you told us about on Friday Night Show was, at least in my opinion, was that your grandmother used to warn you that El Lobo would get you if you went out at night. Do you think she was talking about dogmen or normal wolves?
I don't know, because I never really pried. And the funny thing is, last October, after my father had passed, my brother and I, we were just sharing stories, and we got to talking about our grandparents, and I had brought it up, and I asked him, what do you think she meant by that, And he said, if I were to be honest, I'm thinking like a werewolf type creature. And I was like, okay, that makes sense.
Wow. Well, that does narrow it down. Did you ask them to go into more details on why they thought, instead of talking about a wolf, that she might have been talking about a werewolf type creature?
No, because I should probably ask my brother that, because I think when he would come over for the summers, and she warned him as well, I'm sure her or my grandfather would have gone into more detail with him, because I'm 9 years younger than him. So, they wouldn't want to tell me everything because I was a child, but with him, they probably would have detailed it more. So I think I might go ahead and ask him. Because after we were discussing that, we then kind of branched into the subject about skinwalkers and Sasquatch and our beliefs.
It'd be awfully interesting if you could ask him. It's hard to say what he might tell you about that. If you've had a Dogman encounter and would like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest on one of my 2 Bigfoot shows, please go to mybigfootsighting.com. Now, you grew up there. Considering all the people that you used to rub elbows with and speak with, over the years, did you ever hear anyone else outside of your family mention El Lobo or anything to do with anything that might have been a dogman?
No, the only thing that pops into my brain was, I don't know if you or any of your listeners remember the book Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. They made a movie not long ago, and I can't remember what edition it was, but when I was little, I remember reading it, and a story that always stood out to me, and for some reason was my favorite, but also disturbed me, was the urban legend of the Coyote Girl of Devil's River. But that had to do with, basically, think Jungle Book, Mowgli. He was abandoned and raised by the pack of wolves, and that's what happened to her. They think a pack of wolves ran off with her as an infant, and cowboys would see her, and they try to domesticate her, essentially, and then the pack came and saved her, and a couple of years later, she was spotted by a river nursing a couple of wolf pups. So that's the only thing that I can think of. Otherwise, it's nothing else. It's everything I've discovered on my own, just, being interested in the paranormal and cryptids.
When you say that she was spotted nursing some wolf pups, are you saying that she was breastfeeding them or just taking care of them?
Breastfeeding them.
Well, that's strange because a wolf can't mate with a person, so I wonder what that was all about if that was true.
Exactly. Yeah, I believe the legend goes back to the late 1700s, early 1800s. So, as it's passed down word of mouth, I'm sure a lot of things were misconstrued.
Yeah, I'd say they must have been. When you had that encounter with whatever that creature was in that shack that night, did it give you the same vibes that the dogmen you've encountered gave you?
No, actually it didn't. It gave me more of it was surprised to see me and more of a scared vibe. And when after this memory suddenly came to me, I had to tell my husband so I wouldn't forget and he wouldn't forget. And this was 3 months ago, maybe, that I remembered this. So I told him, I think it was a baby, and it was waiting until nightfall for its mother or its father to come get it because, if it did it in broad daylight, us humans, we're kind of jerks. So do it under the veil of night, where they wouldn't really be seen.
Wow, if that was a baby, that makes it even more disconcerting because can you imagine how a parent would have been if you went into that shack with their baby?
Oh, yeah. Knowing how mamas act around their babies, especially in the animal kingdom, I'm sure something would have caught me.
Yeah, that wouldn't have been good at all. And speaking of Dogman pups, I can't remember the episodes that she was featured on, but Kim is the eyewitness who came on and told us about seeing the female Dogman, or the dog woman, that she affectionately named Ember. Well, she contacted me a few days ago to let me know that she saw Ember again, and guess what? She had 2 Dogman pups with her. So, after having a good talk with her this weekend, I asked her if she'd be interested in coming back on to update everyone listening about Ember and about the pups. Well, she said she'd be happy to do that, so this Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 8 p.m. Central, she's going to come back on to do that. So it'll be something that you definitely won't want to miss. But having said that, let's move on now. How can I ask you this without leading you on this, asking a leading question? When you looked into that shack and saw those blue eyes in there, did you notice anything? Did you notice anything unusual about them that jumped out at you?
I'm glad you asked that because I had forgot to mention they seem to be swaying side to side. And that's what stood out to me was they were kind of going side to side. I'm thinking of when someone's self-soothing and they kind of rock side to side. That's what they look like.
Huh, well, if whatever owned those eyes was rocking side to side, that's a sign of anxiety, so it just might have been a pup in there. How far apart did the eyes seem to be?
So probably a few inches, not too big, but when I see animals with eye shine, that's what it looks like. You can tell that there's that, the snout or whatever that comes between them, and that was what it looked like. I can't exactly remember maybe inches, but I would say the shack was maybe 5 yards away. Like it was across the street, and it was a kind of in the middle of that property. So, and then I was, in my front yard, so a couple of yards away. And, just from the best I can tell, I'm probably minimum 5 inches apart.
Well, too, I'm sure you were so shocked by seeing them that trying to notice how far apart the eyes were was probably last on the list of things you're trying to do. So
Yeah.
That's totally understandable. And how can I ask you this without leading you? There was something else I wanted to ask you about that, but I guess the best way for me to ask you without tipping my hand is, even if those eyes would have been stationary, was there anything about them that struck you as being odd or different or unique?
They were pretty large for the distance that, the eyes and I were at, and they seemed to have like a glow, almost an internal glow, because the sun wasn't setting just yet, so it was maybe probably an hour before, it would fully set. So that's what also struck me, was it looked like they had their own light.
No, I believe you. I believe you. Yeah, it might have been a Dogman. If it was what I'm wondering if it was, you would have noticed a certain quality to those eyes. But the fact that you didn't notice that quality tells me it must not have been what I was wondering if it might have been. So that's why I was asking you those questions, and that's what I was getting at there. How good of a look did you get at the Dogman's eyes when you were taking the trash out that night?
The trash out, I didn't see no eyes, because whatever the person, and the dogmen that were walking, they were away from us, so they had their back turned to me.
At one point, I thought the Dogman turned around, or whatever that was that man was walking. Mm-hmm. I thought it turned and looked at you at one point.
No. No, it didn't. Maybe it was because I had, turned down to grab the trash and quality check. I didn't drop anything. And when I was putting everything in the bin and I, kind of turned back to look at them, maybe that would, I don't know. But no, it didn't turn.
Well, maybe that's a good thing then. Do you think whatever it was that man was walking that night just might have been what you saw inside of the shack?
I don't know. I mean, after I told my husband, all of these encounters, he jokes that because I didn't grab my grandparents or sound the alarm that I see something weird in the shack, that maybe they protected me because I protected, their baby. And that might be fantastical thinking, but, he doesn't know as much as I know so far about Dogmen.
Yeah, I'd say he must not. What do you think are the chances that the dream you had that night wasn't just a random one, that maybe that Dogman or whatever that was had something to do with it?
Just how things kind of lined up was, it was kind of crazy to me. And especially, I've had but a few dreams that have panned out to come true or to fruition. The latest one being my daughter. We weren't even trying then, And then, with a lot of people believing the psychic link, and I'm kind of, leaning towards that too. I feel like maybe something sensed that I'm open to that, or maybe, for lack of better words, the veil for me is thinner than other humans, and that's why it came to me. And if it did come to me, like, say, actually in the night to leave that large canine footprint, who's to say it didn't enter my dreams, with its mind and do what it did? And I'm wondering if by it in the dream scratching my back, if it somehow in a way marked me. I don't know. That might sound far out, but that's something I was thinking about since we talked last week.
Well, there are a lot of moving parts to this. I mean, who's to say that that's far-fetched and there's no possibility that could be accurate? I mean, there's so many things about all this that we just don't know. So
very true.
You just might be right about that. You talked about how you've got these abilities where it seems like you just might be a medium, and that the fact that you being a medium, if you are, it seems to open you up to things like this. How sure are you that if you didn't have these abilities, if you weren't a medium, that those scratches never would have happened on your back?
I'm not sure because, maybe if I didn't have mediumship abilities, I wouldn't have felt that residual pain in my back for, a couple of minutes. And there were no marks on my skin when I woke up. And because of my ADHD, I have a tendency to forget things so quickly. But with that sticking out in my mind, I think, because of possibly the abilities, it's one of those things that's a reminder that, you do have something, and don't ignore it. Versus I would have probably forgotten about it and we wouldn't be here.
Chris, it seems like in some ways having those abilities would be really useful, but in other ways, things like what you experienced that night make it so that maybe it's not all that great to have those abilities. I don't know.
That's true.
It's hard to say. When you found that huge paw print outside your bedroom window later on, did you show it to anyone? And if you did, what did they have to say about them? Or about it?
I believe I showed my dad because I can't remember if he was already outside just kind of tinkering around in the backyard, or if he was on his way out to tinker in the backyard. He had a work shed. And I pointed it out, and he was like, "Oh, that's a big A paw," and kind of went on about his business. And I didn't really tell him about the dream because for a while, when I would tell them anything I saw or sensed or felt or any of that, since I was little, they chalked it up to my imagination, or that I was, I dreamt it, or just kind of off-put it. But my stepmother had a theory, and she believed me more.
I'm glad at least someone believed you. Thank goodness for that. You said the print was massive. How big would you say it was, though?
Let's see. So I think my hand, my palm width is maybe 4.5, maybe 5 inches. And it was bigger than my palm. So I want to say maybe 10 or up.
Wow, that's a big print, and that's well outside the possibility of being left by a wolf or any known canid. The biggest paw print that's ever been left by a wolf, the biggest wolf, is only 5 inches across and 6 inches long. So if it was that big or close to as big as what you said it was, yeah, it's no dog, it's no wolf.
Yeah, and we don't have any, native wolves in this area. And I don't even think, our neighborhood, if they had, a wolf hybrid, I would have remembered that because I would have wanted to pet it.
You're just like me, most likely to die from trying to pet something you've got no business trying to touch.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, guilty as charged. What kind of substrate was that print in?
It was just dirt, the earth. It looked like before my parents moved into that house, it was a flower bed and it hadn't been tended to in years. And I guess it was because it wasn't a flower bed that could be seen, so why bother? So I guess over the years, it just collected regular dirt and dust. So that's what it was.
So if that's the case, if it hadn't rained recently, then that ground must have been pretty darn hard.
Yeah. And it wasn't so much under, like, it was still kind of, that area was protected from, like the elements. If it rained, it wouldn't get flooded or anything. So the dirt was still, kind of loose compared to, the rest of the other, like the rest of that little plot of land the house was on, it would get hard with, having no rain and whatnot. So I think that could also have been why it was there and very prominent, to catch my eye.
Yeah, that would make sense, especially if it didn't have any plants around it. When you had that encounter at Lake Abilene, you were there to try to get back in touch with nature. Do you consider dogmen to be a part of nature or something in conflict with it?
I believe they are a part of nature, that they are, flesh and blood and something to be respected. And I feel like they it seems with their intelligence, they offer that maybe mutual respect. Except for, just like us humans, the unhinged, crazy ones, then that doesn't matter. The respect's out the window, but they feel very organic to me.
That's the funny thing about these guys. I'm not really sure what to think about that. Maybe it's a case of you've got these dogmen over here that are flesh and blood creatures that are trying to scratch out a living out there in the woods, and then you have another group that are from the ether. They are supernatural beings, so I don't really know what to think about that.
I'm there with you.
But then again, there are so many things about these guys that are hard to wrap your mind around. I mean, what else is new? You told us about that clawed hand that you saw wrapped around that tree trunk there. Mm-hmm. Do you think that it might have been peeking around the other side of that tree, looking at you without you knowing it?
It could have been. Yeah, because, I never saw the face or anything. But, I knew it wasn't holding on like, oh, I'm losing my balance. It was more of this is what led you out of here, and I want you to know that. And please go along and be slightly traumatized, but I think it was peeking around. And who knows, it could have probably watched me scramble to my car and leave.
Yeah, that's probably just what it did. Do you think it wrapped its paw around that tree trunk where you could see it do that for your benefit or for some other reason?
I think it could be for my benefit, just to say it was picking up on my anxiety and my thoughts of feeling like I was hunted. If it was benefiting me, I think it was to let me know that it was what ushered me. And I believe it was a she. And, she meant no harm. And even to be like, you're not crazy, it could have been a lot of things. Or it could have just been to mess with me, because I also feel like, in a way, they like to mess with us or kind of troll the humans. So, I mean, I would too if I was one.
Also, you would. If you're a dog man, you terrorize people also?
Not terrorize, maybe kind of troll them, I plan to do that if I become a ghost.
Wow. Gotta watch out for you then. You play for keeps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say you do. Yeah, I don't know for sure, but I bet pretty good money that she put her paw around that tree or her hand to get a response out of you. And understandably so, she did get the response that she was looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah, seems like that's their favorite pastime is messing with us, unfortunately. I should remember this since it hasn't been that long since we recorded that show, but you said you think she just might have been a female. But if I remember correctly, when you told us last Friday night about that mind speak that you experienced, did you say that there wasn't really any female or male quality to the voice?
Correct.
Okay, I thought that's what you had said. Yeah, it just might have been a female. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
You said something on last Friday night's show that threw me for a loop, and some of the listeners apparently. You told us about the time when your son came running up to you and told you that he had just seen a werewolf outside. You said that you laughed at him when he did that, but I'm wondering, why do you do that considering the experiences that you already had?
Well, I apologize for that, especially for anyone who had that impression of me and you. It was more of the way he came in. It was a little dramatic for him, and this happened earlier this year too. And he is 13 years old, so he had opened the door suddenly. I was on the couch and slammed it and backed up against it and was breathing heavy. And he's like, nope, I'm not doing it. There's a werewolf outside. Nope. And there's not even a full moon. And it was more of his little reaction that made me laugh. He also has ADHD, so we're neuro-spicy. We're on a different level than neurotypicals, so he probably would have done the same to me. But, I had asked him, are you okay? Are you sure? And he said, yes, I'm not going back out there. And I was like, all right, well, we have trash, leftover scraps from dinner that will smell and that the kittens will try to eat. So I'll go ahead and take it out there. And I grabbed my flashlight that's it's not like police grade, but almost there. It's cobalt and it's pretty bright. And I took it out there to see. And when I threw the trash, I didn't see anything. But I will say, for our neighborhood at night and living here almost 11 years, it felt very quiet and it was eerie. So I'm not doubting he saw something. And then too, he didn't know about my encounters. So now he does, but then he didn't. He didn't know I've seen or what I believe or any of that.
Did he seem elated when you told him about your experiences?
Yes. And it was a huge weight lifted off my shoulders, and I could also sense that he felt like he could be more open about any other odd experiences to share, because they already know that I'm sensitive to ghosts and the paranormal, and they're pretty open to telling me about what they see and sense, him and his older brother. So after telling them, I do feel like also that kind of opened them up more to talk to me if they were to see something more bizarre.
I'm so glad you let him know that you've had encounters with him too. Thank goodness for that, because otherwise I can only imagine the difficulty he's going to have dealing with it. Speaking of that, how is he with all this? Is he having trouble coming to terms with that experience still, or is he okay?
He's okay. He hasn't brought it up, and I'm sure if I do ask him, his first response will probably be, oh yeah. He's a very happy-go-lucky kid.
Well, that's great. That definitely helps. You can be happy-go-lucky, but a traumatic experience can alter you in ways where it seems like you're still carrying baggage. Have you got any of that off of him? That maybe there are some underlying issues there still?
No, and every once in a while, I like to kind of check in with him and his older sibling and just be like, hey, are you doing good? You sure? You sure you're doing good? Nothing's going to come out 20 years from now after you've seen a therapist that, we went wrong. And, no, you're good. And if something has been weighing on it, I'm an empath. So I will pick up if they're lying or if there's something blocking it. And so far, it has been earnest from them.
We've all responded to things in our lives that we wish we could go back and respond in a different way. I mean, Chris is human. If your little boy comes running in and acts the way that her son did, I mean, little boys, they mess around, they play around all the time. No one can fault her for laughing at him when he did that because he might have done that in a jocular way. You don't know. It's hard to say. But what does matter is how she responded after the fact. She made sure that he knew that she had had her own encounters with dogmen. She's supporting him and making sure that he knows that she cares about him. So, yeah, please don't be hard on her because she definitely doesn't deserve that. She doesn't. Well, before we get out of here, Chris, do you have any closing comments you'd like to put out there for us?
Well, thank you for what you just said, Vic. I really appreciate it. And closing comments. If you're struggling with, if you've seen something that you don't know or you've been, the mind likes to kind of protect itself and it could have locked it away. Hopefully, once you realize if you have seen something, you do find the courage, because that took me a while to do that too. And, there's nothing wrong with it. And it has helped a lot. And I hope anyone can be able to talk about it and not be afraid. And they'll feel better, because I know when I told you that I cried when I told the entire truth, seeing the hand and the claw and it, slinking away. And that was because you were the first person I told. And it was just such a relief to tell someone and not feel judged. So I hope that makes sense.
That does make sense. And I'm so glad that you did find the courage to contact me and let me know about those experiences. And you knew full well I'd never laugh at you, and I'd do the best I could to help you. So, yeah, I'm so glad you did all that. I really am. You're not the only one who was in that boat. I mean, there are a lot of people that I speak with who they tell me that they've been holding on to their encounters for years, but for whatever reason, they finally decided to reach out to me and tell me about their experiences with dogmen. And it's a huge relief. And to the man, to the woman, they always say that they wish they would have done it sooner, instead of carrying it around all this time and not having any relief or not having anyone that they can share the experiences with without being laughed at. So, yeah, like I said, I'm so glad you decided to contact me.
Yes, definitely. And I hope, as people listen and like and subscribe and even share your podcast out and YouTube channel, that it will reach other people, and, it will reach that one person that's trying to grapple with what they saw or they thought they saw or felt. And once they feel comfortable, they too can reach out to you, and just, it's the networking of that. I hope it keeps growing.
Well, it should. There's never any pressure to contact me to share a dogman encounter that you've had with me, but for anyone who has had an encounter that wants help, I'll always be there for you. So please remember that. But having said that, Chris, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing the details of your experiences, #1, last Friday, and of course for coming back on to do this Q&A with me. I appreciate it.
Of course. thank you so much for having me back and asking me questions. I really appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. And down the road, if you ever need help again, please let me know, because, of course, I'll be there for you. But having said that, thanks again so much, and have a great night.